All right, we're just at 3 o'clock Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started and welcome you all. And I know we have many folks who registered for today's session, so hopefully they'll be joining us as we get going. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We're going to be talking about tools and approaches for resident-centered outcomes measurement in affordable housing. I'm Alexandra Nassau-Brownstone, Vice President of Resident Outcomes and CORES at Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, otherwise known as SAFE. My colleague Nicole is going to tell you a little bit more about SAFE in just a moment, but one of SAFE's initiatives is the CORES certification program. Go to the next slide, please. And some of you may have heard about today's webinar through our newsletter, and you're already familiar with CORES. But for those of you who aren't familiar yet, CORES, which stands for Certified Organization for Resident Engagement and Services, is a certification which we launched back in 2018 that was designed to recognize owner-operators and third-party providers that have developed a robust commitment, capacity, and competency in providing resident services coordination in affordable rental homes. And we developed CORES with several objectives in mind. First, to establish a common language and understanding some standards for the field, to support stronger resident services operations and to help communicate some of those structures and those processes with external stakeholders such as funders and investors, partners and policymakers, to support and attract new sources of funding and hopefully sustainable, stable funding for resident services coordination. And finally, to continue to demonstrate the impact of affordable housing that's paired with services. And so while CORES doesn't provide direct capacity building training, we do leverage our free online resource library and this webinar series to highlight and promote tools that help practitioners and others in the field to learn from one another, to create deeper shared understanding and standards, and to help to demonstrate impact. So we're really excited for today's webinar, which is going to feature a toolkit that SAFE published last month, which brings together two components of our work around resident services and resident outcomes. The first being SAFE's framework for a system of resident services coordination, which is really the foundation of CORES, and which outlines an approach to the practice of robust and thoughtful and resident-centered services, infrastructure, service delivery, and resident engagement. And the second, which is the learning that SAFE and SAFE members have gained through years of engagement around data collection, and specifically resident outcomes data collection. And we hear from a lot of organizations and stakeholders asking about which measures are the best measures. Do you have examples of survey and assessment tools, resident engagement tools, data management tools, et cetera? And this toolkit really captures a lot of the knowledge and the best practices that we're seeing in the field today. Go to the next slide. A few housekeeping items before we really get going. We are recording today's session, and the recording, along with the slides that are used today, will be made available. Please use the chat and the Q&A function to engage both with the presenters on today's call and with each other. You may have really terrific resources and practices that you're using that you'd like to share with each other. Use the chat for that. Try to use the Q&A for questions you want to pose to the presenters. I think that's all my housekeeping. So without further ado, I'd like to quickly welcome our presenters and thank them for being here. My colleague Nicole Manchester is Director of Data and Analytics for SAFE. Christy Lowry serves as the Business Intelligence Analyst at the Community Housing Partners. And Carmen Hancock is VP of Managed Care Relationships at Prospera Housing and Community Services. So again, thank you all for participating in today's presentation and discussion. And Nicole, I'll pass things over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Alexandra. So excited to see so many people on this webinar, existing folks that I know and new people, and thanks to everyone for joining. So here's an agenda for the hour. We'll start with some words of welcome from our funder for this project, the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. Then I'm going to give a brief overview of the toolkit to orient everyone to it. It's available on our website, and Mina helpfully dropped a link to the toolkit in the chat. Then we'll hear from Christy Lowry from CHP and Carmen Hancock from Prospera. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and you're very welcome to put questions in the Q&A function as we go along. So now I'm going to invite Kellyanne Kirkpatrick with Amazon to say a few words of welcome. So Kellyanne, take it away.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Hopefully everybody can hear me. First and foremost, elated to see so many people on this call. It is a delight to see how important this issue is, that so many of you are willing to take time out of your day to engage with the toolkit. On behalf of the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, which is Amazon's more than $2 billion commitment to preserve or create 20,000 units of affordable housing in 3 of our hometown communities. That includes the Puget Sound, Nashville, Tennessee, as well as the greater Washington, D.C. region, which is where I sit. We are incredibly elated to support SAFE in this work. We know how important it is to think about affordable housing holistically, and not just the buildings that are created, but the way that we approach making sure that residents have services and that their voice is encapsulated in the way that they are served. So today is an incredibly important opportunity for us. I am also here with my colleague, David Swift, who I will allow to say a quick word of hello. But truly, the moment today is about thanking the panelists for their time and thanking all of you for participating. So just without further ado, David, if you've got a few words, but thank you so much. And again, Amazon is elated to be a part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Kellyanne. It's our pleasure to be here. We're very excited to be supporting the creation of this tool and its launch, and we're excited to see all these people involved in supporting affordable housing throughout the greater Washington, D.C. area and beyond. So thank you very much for being involved in putting effort into this important work. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kellyanne and David. So again, to introduce myself again, I'm Nicole Manchester. I'm the Director of Data and Analytics for Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, for SAFE. So who is SAFE? For those of you who don't know us already, many of you probably do. We are a practice and policy collaborative of 12 of the larger nonprofit affordable housing providers across the U.S. Our mission is to advance the creation and preservation of healthy, sustainable, affordable rental homes so that every person has a home and a flourishing community. The graphic here shows how we do our work, which involves lots of deep collaboration between our members and partners, which we then translate into policy and practice recommendations that are really rooted in what's happening on the ground for the SAFE members. So these are the 12 SAFE members. However, our work on the toolkit we developed was informed not just by these members, but also the larger community of CORES organizations as well. A few stats about the SAFE portfolio. We have about 145,000 rental homes at almost 2,000 properties across the US. And our members house almost 250,000 people each year, which includes families, seniors with limited means, and people with disabilities and special needs. So one of the main bodies of work that we have is our Resident Health and Outcomes Initiative, which we started about 10 years ago. So the 3 primary ways in which we advance this work are: first, using the social determinants of health framework to create healthier and more equitable communities and environments for residents. Second, we established a framework for the shared understanding and practice for high quality resident services coordination. And then third, we created a common data collection project across our members of key resident outcomes measures, which both allows us to tell a story of collective impact across the members and also creates space for the SAFE members to learn from each other on best practices around measuring the impact of their services. So related to number 2 previously, this is our framework that we created. Many of you have probably seen this many times, based on iterative conversations with our members from a few years ago that describes all of the functions and steps we think are needed to have a robust, high quality systems approach to resident services coordination. And this is of course the basis for our course program that Alexandra leads. Then related to number 3 from a couple of slides ago, this is our common list of key resident outcomes measures we developed with the SAFE members and are collected by many SAFE members and have been reported back to us as part of our common data collection project for about 8 years now. We have a separate report from a few years ago called our Impact of Home Report that details some of the early positive results we've seen from this data, if you want to check that out on our website. And hopefully Mina can drop in a link to that report in a second. So how did this toolkit come about? The origin story here. We've had lots of conversations with investors, course applicants, other organizations about how to operationalize the work of data collection and evaluation of resident services. And although we had experience collecting data and we had published our framework, I just showed you, We didn't have anything published that specifically laid out all of the steps and systems and processes needed to do data collection in a way that puts equity and resident agency at the center of the work. So the thesis here is that collecting data and measuring impact doesn't exist in a vacuum apart from the other work. It's strengthened when it's layered within an equitable resident-centered approach to resident services, service-enriched housing. So for investors, those of you who might be joining us here, we would argue you're going to have better resident outcomes if you incorporate a systems approach to data and evaluation. And then to any developers that are joined us, we would argue that your programs and practices and policies are strengthened when you collect and analyze resident outcomes. So another brief overview. This is what the toolkit looks like. We published it a few weeks ago with the support of the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. Like I said, this is really rooted in what we've learned from the SAFE members and CORES organizations and what we've seen them do in their day-to-day work. We hope this will be helpful for a range of audiences, including, of course, housing owners and operators, but also third-party services providers and investors of housing and services. So I'm going to walk through the toolkit a little bit here. So the main sections are first just about the toolkit and about SAFE's work in this space. The second section lays out all of the steps that we think are important for a cycle of impact measurement and evaluation in service-enriched housing. And then the third section has lots of good resources in the appendix. And you don't have to read this toolkit from cover to cover to be able to use it. You are welcome to go to the parts or sections of the toolkit that matter most to your work and pick out the sections or pieces that are most relevant to you. So digging into this cycle here, on the right here, first, step one, we think it's really important to start with planning and thinking about how you're going to integrate outcomes measurement into your broader work. Second step, you're going out collecting data in different forms. This is perhaps the most meaty section of the report, lots of subsections. Step three, you're compiling, storing, cleaning the data you have. Fourth, analyzing data, creating reports on it. And then the fifth step here, which has lots of component steps, perhaps the most important part, you're putting the data into action, using it to prioritize resident goals, inform internal decision-making, establishing partnerships, and then ultimately hopefully telling a story of impact for residents. So the next couple slides, I'm going to dig into one section of the toolkit in particular, step 2, about collecting data, because we get a lot of questions from folks about survey design and survey administration. This section starts on page 12 of the toolkit if you want to open it up, and it first talks about the mechanics of administering surveys. So there are various subcategories here. For example, should I do anonymous or identifiable surveys? How do I think about bias in survey responses? When should I do the survey? How often? Should I do it online or by paper? Should I hire a third party to administer the survey? So we don't provide a lot of hard and fast concrete answers to these questions because we've seen this done successfully by our members and CORES organizations in various ways, depending on their circumstances. Rather, we have more guiding questions to help you think about pros and cons as you make these decisions and navigate this process. But drilling down more into survey design, people often ask us, what questions should I put on my resident survey? So when we look at surveys across the SAFE members and CORES organizations, we generally see 6 categories or buckets of questions. We think it's important to try to hit most, if not all, of these sections in a survey or across multiple data collection methods. And I will also say that some of this can be collected by focus groups or community meetings as well, but we think surveys are important to capture input from a broad range of residents in ways that you can hopefully quantify and track changes over time as well. So the first category here, resident demographics, fairly straightforward. The second category, resident priorities, goals, and needs. So what have residents articulated that they want in terms of programming services supports? Third, participation or engagement, how residents are engaging and participating in programs. When you're thinking about a logic model, this would probably fall in the outputs section of that logic model. And some organizations might be tracking this in a separate data system as contacts or attendance outside of the survey. The fourth section, getting more into outcomes, questions around short-term outcomes. This could include questions about residents' access to resources or benefits, such as do you have health insurance or do you have a bank account? The next section on resident satisfaction. Some think of this more as a short-term outcome, some as more of a long-term outcome. We think it's a really important category in and of itself, just to understand how residents like living in a property or community and how they're experiencing that. And then lastly, we think it's very important to look at long-term outcomes as well, which could be around physical, mental health, community engagement, financial resilience, educational advancement, or other areas. So I also want to highlight that we have various call-out boxes or sections scattered throughout the toolkit on resident-centered, equitable approaches to the work, such as including resident voice in survey design, minimizing survey burden for residents, protecting and securing resident data, disaggregating data analysis, particularly by race and ethnicity, sharing data back with residents and engaging them in interpretation. And then finally, when you're thinking about sharing data internally and externally, considering how to incorporate stories and storytelling and perhaps case studies with that data analysis. And of course, these aren't the only ways that this work can be resident-centered and equitable. There are many resources out there from other organizations that think deeply on this topic. This is just a starting point for those going through the toolkit and how we're seeing some of the SAFE members operationalize some of these concepts. And then lastly, I want to call out the many resources we have in the appendix. Don't skip the appendix. It has lots of meaty, good information in there. In particular, Appendix D lists all of the SAFE Outcomes Initiative measures and has details about why we decided to include the measures in the list, then some benchmarking resources to help contextualize the data that you might be collecting. And then also Appendix E on resident data privacy. This has lots of good information about laws and best practices around resident data privacy. We developed this in consultation with a law firm, Covington and Burling, last fall. So it might be helpful for folks. So that's all I'm going to highlight on the toolkit. There's lots of other good information on there. Another example on step 3 around storing data. We have various links to other resources in the toolkit. For example, we link to a report that we put together, a memo about commonly used data systems that we see across SAFE members and forage organizations for those that are thinking about investing in a data system for resident services, for example, Ask Online or ETO or Salesforce. So that's another example of various links to other resources we have. So, and I welcome everyone to check out the toolkit on our website and share it around with those who are interested. So now I'm going to pass the baton over to Christy Lowry to say a few words about how her organization, Community Housing Partners, is putting some of these concepts that I'm describing into work. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Christy, and let you introduce yourself and take it away. Let me know when you want me to advance.
Well, thank you. You can advance right now. As Nicole said, I'm Christy Lowry. I'm the Business Intelligence Analyst for Community Housing Partners, CHP. We're a nonprofit organization based in Christiansburg, Virginia. Next slide, please. CHP started in 1975 as a volunteer organization in Blacksburg, Virginia, performing minor home repairs for local low-income families living in unsafe or unhealthy conditions. We now have over 400 employees across multiple states in the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. Our mission is to create homes and communities that are healthy, safe, sustainable, and affordable. And we do that through our 3 primary lines of business, which are focused on building, preserving, and weatherizing homes, and providing housing services that include property management, resident services, and home ownership. And we have approximately 100 properties that we manage across the states you see on the slide there. Next slide, please. So I was invited to talk to you today about one of CHP's housing services initiatives, surveying of the residents at our multifamily properties and the debriefs that we conduct to share the results with internal stakeholders. We started this resident surveying project in 2019 with the development of the survey questions. We put these together by including representatives from various CHP departments and having them respond to this question. If you could ask our residents 5 questions, what would they be and why do you want that information? From there, we created a survey that focused on residents' experiences with CHP staff and programs, residents' feelings of safety, security, and happiness in our apartment communities, and what works and what doesn't for them in the built environment. We plan to deploy the survey at our pilot properties in 2020, but that didn't work for obvious reasons. So we piloted that survey in 2021 at 8 representative properties. After the pilot, we went back and adjusted our questions and our deployment methods. And then we deployed the survey to 1/3 of our properties this past year in 2022. We'll survey the rest of our residents over the next 2 years, and then we'll start it all over again. Next slide, please. So after surveying at a property is complete, and I've had a chance to pull the responses together, I lead survey debriefs. A debrief is a virtual meeting of resident services on-site staff, supervisors and leadership, property management on-site staff, regional managers and leadership, the property's asset manager, and that department's leadership, as well as other CHP leaders. Next slide, please. The debrief takes up to an hour, depending on the amount of discussion. During the debrief, I start with a high-level review of the results. You can see some of the pages for the report here. It includes the response rate, the net promoter score, Likert scale responses, aggregated open text responses. And after we review the responses, discussion follows regarding anything that caught the attention of meeting participants. And as we talk, our on-site staff and supervisors are often able to provide additional context to some of the resident feedback. After the meeting, survey results are shared with attendees along with the meeting notes. And those notes include any action items, who will be responsible for completing those items. And of course, we also share high-level results back with the residents. Next slide, please. Leaders who attended the debriefs offered the feedback you see here. The surveys and debriefs have been incredibly informative. They're serving their purpose in elevating resident voice. The debrief meetings are also acting as a gateway to enhance collaboration among CHP's departments as we work to address expressed concerns while also identifying and scaling what's working well at a property. It's been an overwhelmingly positive initiative. I can't stress that enough. And internal stakeholders have a definite appreciation for the feedback we get, both positive and negative. Thanks to the debriefs, on-site staff have a chance to share their thoughts on residents' responses and provide their own context around what's working and what's not at a property. And I know leadership has come away from this process with even more appreciation for our on-site staff. More importantly, we all have a better understanding of the people we serve, and in their responses, residents have expressed how much they appreciate the opportunity to share their experiences in our apartment communities. So the success of the surveying and the debriefs has led to additional surveying of our staff, our residents, our clients, while keeping the potential for survey fatigue top of mind, of course. So that's the end of what I've prepared, but I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A segment. And I will turn it back over to Nicole now.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy. This is really interesting. If I could just ask one quick little follow-up question of you. So we have a couple minutes here. I was really interested in how you decided to, rather than taking the survey results and simply just emailing them around or providing the results and leaving it at that, you decided to set up these meetings with staff from different departments to talk through the results. And you kind of got at this already, but what do you think the value has been to having these meetings where you're sitting down and talking through the data versus simply just going back and forth on email and sharing the results that way.
Yeah, what I like about the debriefs is that it allows us to fill in whatever gaps are in the data with, from feedback from on-site staff. And rather than people filling in those gaps on their own in their office, without additional context, sometimes even, it gives us we're all coming at it from the same place. And so we're all hearing what the on-site staff is saying, and we can all react to it there in the moment, ask follow-up questions. It's just been a really fantastic way to do it. And I don't think I could ever go back to just emailing a report after a survey and saying, here's the information, good luck with it.
Right, absolutely. That's interesting because it reminds me, there's some sections in the toolkit where we talk about, I think it's in section 4, about interpreting survey results and how different audiences will interpret the same chart or similar charts very differently, depending on just how their role in the organization, or if they're residents, and their perspectives on what the data means. And so it's just always very important when you're creating data reports and charts to consider what the audience is bringing to it and how they might interpret it differently.
Right. Another reason why the debriefs have been important is because we do have quite a few open text response sections, and we will get long responses from residents, which of course does not relay well to a long report format. And so we try to keep these anonymous, and anyone who works on a property can probably pinpoint the voice of certain residents in responses. So in the interest of anonymity, I'm the only person who sees the full responses. I aggregate those text responses. And then when we're in the debrief meeting, if that stirs questions, it says here, I don't know, the grounds have a bunch of trash. What exactly are you talking about? Where on the grounds is there trash? And I can scan through the survey results and offer additional context from those responses as well.
Gotcha. That's very interesting. So in real time, kind of going through more specific data and working through it. Great. Well, thank you so much. That's been very interesting and helpful. So I will go ahead and pass the baton and invite Carmen Hancock with Prospera Housing Community Services to say a few words. And thank you so much, Carmen, for joining.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks everyone with SAFE for gathering us all together and introducing this toolkit. It's going to be so beneficial to so many organizations. As Nicole said, I'm Carmen Hancock. I'm the Vice President of Managed Care Relationships for Prospera Housing Community Services. For those of you not familiar with Prospera, we are a nonprofit organization based out of San Antonio, Texas. We do affordable housing development, property management, and resident support services. We're actually going to be celebrating our 30-year anniversary this year, which is very exciting. So we've got a birthday coming up in September. We currently own or manage 54 affordable housing properties with nearly 4,800 units throughout Central and South Texas. These are a mix of project-based Section 8 and LIHTC units. We average about 2 to 3 developments per year, and we are so grateful that we are able to provide a full-time resident services manager at nearly all of our locations. We received our core certification at the end of 2021, and I'm happy to share some of the techniques and thought processes that we've used to integrate resident-centered best practices throughout our portfolio. Slide, please. So, developing a concise set of measurable and impactful outcomes that really are resident focused can feel daunting, but don't get lost in the process, you guys. Focus on your mission. Your mission will guide you to identify opportunities for deeper impact and transformational change within the communities that you serve. You really want to focus on identifying those root causes and high impact areas that open the potential for intervention to have lasting and sustainable impact. As you think about pursuing funding opportunities and partnerships, make sure that those opportunities and partnerships align with your mission, vision, and values. Don't chase the money, don't get off target, follow that mission. And as we talk about that, you know, if your organization is in the process of starting on this journey to developing true resident-centered, data-driven outcome measurements, really one of the first steps is going to be identifying primary stakeholders. Slide, please. So a lot of this is probably going to sound repetitive. Nicole mentioned that decisions aren't made in a vacuum, and they truly aren't. We rely on partners, we rely on our board members, we rely on staff. So we rely on our primary stakeholders to really drive what the decisions that we make and what we want to see in terms of outcomes, goals, areas of improvement, things we want to change. So the primary stakeholders for each organization are going to be different. It depends on who has the most impact, who contributes to you achieving your goals or achieving your mission. Is it a set of critical partners, major funders, a local government, perhaps your residents? So I really want to focus on perspective of residents as stakeholders in terms of being really the group that's most impacted by our work. So we want to get buy-in from those stakeholders, and we want to figure out, really leverage the areas that your stakeholders can bolster your mission and help you alleviate roadblocks. So we come to what are the key areas of focus and desired outcomes of the primary stakeholders. Next slide. So as we consider our residents as one of our primary stakeholders, again, we want to include that resident voice. We want to make sure that we're not making decisions in a vacuum. This statement is one of my favorite when it comes to human service and social service work. Nothing for me without me. So I know when people make decisions for me, or when they tell me what's best for me, and they, you know, other people impose goals and visions, you know, on me, I don't get very much. And that may not necessarily align with what I see as my dreams and aspirations. So when we think about the outcomes that we want to see for our residents, they are our subject matter experts. We want to consider that they have lived experience, and their input, their experiences, their insights, their recommendations are truly critical in guiding and informing the outcomes that we want to deem as important. We can't be siloed in our work. We have to consider the input of our stakeholders. So when it comes to residents as those subject matter experts and stakeholders, you all have already mentioned some of the methods that can be used to sort of gather their input or insight: surveys, resident-led focus groups, community meetings, direct resident feedback. There are all sorts of methods. These are just a few. Let's go to the next slide. I want to take a look at one of the ways that we've used resident-led focus groups to help us sort of pin down outcomes. We have noticed, as most of you all have as well, there are going to be residents in your communities that step up as community leaders. They, whether personally identify themselves or just seem to naturally be identified by others in the community as leaders, as advocates, as a voice for others. We take a look at who those folks are and go to them directly and ask them, do you want to be an advocate? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be involved in promoting and leading change within your community? And most of the time they say yes. So we identify those people who have already stepped up. We provide them additional mentorship, development opportunities, give them training and support, and really embolden them to take on that position as a resident leader. We've invited them personally to reach out to other members of their community and invite them to engage in resident-led focus groups. Again, these resident leaders are the ones who are coming up with the questions, who are leading the focus groups, who are taking the information, and then giving us feedback as to what their interpretations were. While we've sat in and observed the focus groups, you know, our staff may have a different interpretation of someone's feedback than the resident does themselves. And we have used this specifically as we worked through a project in the last couple of years on trauma-informed design and affordable housing. So from that perspective, it really is critical that we have the voice of residents, because we have to consider them as subject matter experts and persons with lived experience that drive what trauma-informed design should look like for them in their communities. Next slide. So I noticed after I made this slide that it probably doesn't look very focused, even though it's about focus. And there are 3 words at the top though: focus, clarity, intentionality. For those of you all who have gotten the opportunity to look through the toolkit already, you've seen these words a lot. You have to, these are keywords that stand out to me in the toolkit and in terms of just planning for our organization in general. Absence of focus equals a recipe for disaster. So, you know, identifying the endpoint and then working back is the best thing to do. If you don't know where it is that you're going, it's really hard to develop a map for how to get there. So some of the things that I recommend that we have found is really beneficial in our organization and that you will see echoed in the toolkit: emphasize evidence-based strategies and practices as you're working through goals, outcomes, accomplishments. The toolkit is a great example of an evidence-based, you know, strategy or set of guidelines that you can use to help you. Clarify your intent with precision. So there are some questions to ask. What is it that we want to achieve or prove or impact or improve? And once you determine that, what exactly are we trying to measure? I want to go back to Nicole's example about health insurance and preventative care outcomes. Yes, that could be a short-term outcome with does someone have health insurance? Did they go to their preventative care appointment this year? But that also, we feel, is going to lead to longer-term outcomes. So what is it that we're trying to measure? Are we trying to measure, did someone go to an appointment, or are we trying to measure, are they getting better? Are they getting healthier? Is there an outcome to them going to their primary care appointments? So that's food for thought. And then how will we know when we're successful? Because you want to be able to celebrate that, even the little small steps when you get there. So again, don't bite off more than you can chew. Focus on 2 to 3 specific data points that will serve to measure or prove your outcomes. And we're talking about data-driven here. So they need to be objective, relevant. Make sure that the data points that you're gathering are relevant to the outcome that you actually want to see, and intentional. And then finally, once you've pinpointed those data sources, assign responsibility for who's doing that data collection. Is there a schedule? Is there a specific person? Is there a partner? So make sure that that is solidified as you move forward in implementing these systems. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one of our outcomes. I apologize, it's so small, but we have partnered with managed care organizations heavily over the last few years, really with that focus on health and wellness. So I wanted to just walk through this quickly. And I'm elated that it actually ties into some of the things that Nicole's already mentioned. So first thing, definition of focus. We're focusing all of our services and supports in terms of social determinants of health. So health and wellness is the focus that we have with this particular outcome. What is the goal or the outcome, the desired outcome? Precise statement. So residents living in affordable housing communities with enriched wraparound services have improved health outcomes and overall well-being. How are we going to prove it? What is the data that we're collecting right now that can point towards proving that outcome. So data-driven outcome measurements, the number of residents with healthcare insurance, the number of residents who are in identified managed care organizations that have improved health outcomes, the number of residents attending annual preventative care appointments. So a lot of these echo, some of SAFE's measurements as well. And then finally, where are we gathering this data from? Pinpoint specifically your data sources. How are we going to acquire and capture this? Make sure it's very clear. So our services managers collect health plan insurance information at the initial assessment. We actually have contracts with and business associate agreements with our managed care organization partners that allow us to tap into their data with regard to the residents that we have that are their members. Are they seeing better health outcomes? Are they attending their appointments in a timely manner? Are they picking up their prescriptions when they're supposed to? So we can compare the medical data with our social determinants of health data and truly see, are we having an impact with the projects and programs that we've implemented? So that's just one of our examples to share with you. Next slide. Some final thoughts. Be realistic. We want to see things happen very quickly, but organizational change and growth requires patience, persistence, and true impacts take a long time to prove. We're talking 3 to 5 years sometimes for actually seeing the impacts from something that you've instituted, from a new program or from a new service. So be patient. Again, intentionally, there's that word, intentionally focus on areas that have the greatest impact. Focus your efforts there. If you try to do too much, nothing's going to get done very well. Persons with lived experience or our residents, they're critical in guiding and informing what outcomes are important, not to us, but to them. Make your decisions with focus, clarity, and intentionality, and celebrate your successes. The last thing I'm going to say, and I threw this in at the end because it's so important to me, continuous quality improvement is the key. This is not a one and done. This is an ongoing process. This truly is a process that shouldn't end. You do really well at something and you one up that, there's always room for improvement. So you're gathering, you're analyzing, you're asking yourselves critical questions, you're asking your stakeholders or your residents critical questions as well, but you're asking those with the intent to take action. Make sure that you are following through on your promise to your residents in terms of improving their quality of life, and then implement changes and start over. So that's what I have. Thank you all so much.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much, Carmen. This has been super interesting and lots of connections to the toolkit and kind of crossovers there. So super helpful to see that. I particularly loved the focus on intentionality and, thinking about the end goal and how you work towards that end goal. And I was thinking in the toolkit, we talk a bit about how having that intentionality and having that focus also can help with minimizing survey burden, hopefully for residents too, if that way you don't have dozens of questions on a survey that's continually changing, that you can be a little more strategic in what you're asking and hopefully have consistent measures over time too.
Absolutely.
And also thought your thoughts on and work on focus groups is also very interesting. We talk a bit in the toolkit as well about how organizations can think about it in a more formal ways, might called like mixed methods evaluation, how you can think about layering in focus groups with surveys. You could do a focus group that will help inform how you design a survey, and then the results from your survey you could use to then inform perhaps a future series of focus groups. And it can be very iterative of going back and forth of using both those concepts of, focus groups or meetings or however you, targeted interviews or however you think about that they can but very much inform your survey work as well. So yeah, so this was super interesting. So I see that we have some great questions in the Q&A. So I want to make sure that we have time to get to some of these, and I also have some questions I've prepared for Christy and Carmen as well. So it looks like there's a couple questions in here. Let me actually go ahead and advance the slide forward a little bit to the discussion here. There's a few questions in here for Christy, actually, I guess maybe we could start with the very first question is sharing survey findings back with residents and the formats that you do that with. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, or if there's other questions in here on examples of how you use the survey feedback you want to?
Sure. So for the surveys that we do for a third of our properties every year, we share those back by mailing them directly to the residents. In other instances for surveys, we have shared them back on a website as well as posting them at the property. It depends a lot on the population, and for this year's share back, same thing. We'll look at the population. We'll see how many people are actually online, how many people responded to the survey using, a QR code versus using paper, and then we'll adapt based on that. I'll throw in that I saw one asking what tool we use, and I learned my first year doing this. We were using Tableau, we're transitioning to Power BI, and I set up the reports that I share during the debrief in such a way so that they are easily turned into a report as a PDF. So that reduces the reporting burden on me as well.
Great, thank you. Super interesting. And your mention of the QR code, I think, connects to a third question on here from Malia about how you actually implement the survey, if you do it electronic versus paper. I think Nina may
our Vice President of Resident Services coined the spray and pray approach as how we do it. Before deploying the surveys at each property, I meet with the on-site staff, find out, do you need large type surveys? Do you have many people who are using the internet? What do you think will work best? And then we take those, adjust accordingly, but we give paper surveys, we give them large type. If there are language barriers, we try to address those. We'll also do a interview style. We'll make people available to do that. We have QR codes. We post flyers that have both a survey link and a QR code. Spray and pray.
Well, I think, that's recognizing some challenges with digital access among many residents, particularly for seniors, maybe less familiarity with some of the digital tools. And so just trying to meet people where they are in terms of, whatever format works best for them and taking kind of a multimodal approach. I think we see that among a lot of state members and boards organizations. Maybe Carmen, I'll move to you here. There's a question in here about, from an anonymous attendee, are residence leaders compensated for their time in survey promotion, meeting participation, perhaps involvement in focus groups? If you speak to that.
Yes, so in the particular project that I was referring to with regard to trauma-informed.
Hey, Carmen,
yes.
You're a little bit quiet, maybe lean a little bit closer in. Maybe.
So in that particular project, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, where we were focused on trauma-informed design in affordable housing communities, we did compensate those residents that stepped up as resident advocates. Yes. Now, as you all know, there are it gets a little tricky at times with regard to low-income residents having additional income. So I will say that they were compensated, but we did have to get creative in some instances, especially if that compensation was going to put their housing stability at risk. So we found ways of compensation that were meaningful to the participants. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some other questions that are popping up in here. I guess they share the tool of the surveys they use. We can certainly follow up on that, but I will also put in a plug for the CORS library as well. I think it's corsonline.org, has tons of resources, example survey tools, other example formats to check out. So if not from CHP and Prospera, there's lots of other organizations tools, and we can certainly follow up with Carmen and Christy afterwards if there are resources they could share. So a question for Christy, does property management play a role in distributing surveys, or is managed entirely by resident services? Interesting question there. Is there cross-department work on that, or?
Yes, it's a great collaborative effort, the whole surveying process, and property management and resident services work together to get the surveys to the residents and to help them fill it out and everything else that's needed in it.
Awesome. That's great. So I had a question. I'm going to use my prerogative to ask my own question of Christy and Carmen. So one question that, and you both spoke to this a little bit in your presentations, but just digging into this a little bit more. One question we hear from a lot of organizations out there is how to choose which measures to include on a survey or assessment, considering that, you know, the universe of things that you could measure and assess is very large, and maybe you're trying to limit your survey to say 1 or 2 or 3 pages, or some number of questions. So you have to be pretty strategic in what you include. For organizations that are struggling to choose which measures to, if they're starting a survey, any advice or thoughts you would give to how to go about selecting measures? Carmen, you already spoke to this bit in your presentation, but just any kind of practical tips for how to start thinking about this?
Well, I spoke to engaging stakeholders. Obviously, we were focused on residents as stakeholders, but if organizations are guided by boards of directors, and those folks a lot of times have outcomes or impacts that they're interested in, or that they have a particular niche in. So asking the stakeholder, that's why you really have to identify who is it that is helpful to your organization achieving goals, who can help you remove roadblocks, who can provide resources to you. Reach out to those organizations, groups, or people and ask, what are your resources and tools? What are the outcomes or impacts that we think we can accomplish with those things? That's what I would suggest is stakeholder buy-in.
And I'll add in, I think Carmen said this in her presentation, is beginning with the end in mind. What are you going to do with the answers that you get, and make sure you're going to do something with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Christy, that actually, just to follow up on that a bit, there is a question that came up in the chat or the Q&A about some, that's kind of related to what you just said, some examples of how you're using the feedback you're getting on these surveys. Like maybe around satisfaction, or is there any examples of how you've taken some of the survey results and kind of translated that into, maybe changes to the property or community programs or
Sure.
things like that?
Yeah, part of the reason why we in previous years, we did the surveying in summertime. Debriefs would take place in early fall, or would be wrapping up in the fall. And budgeting is done by then. And we found while doing these debriefs that asset management, there were a lot of things that they wanted to shift focus to. And so things had already been budgeted. So as a result, we're going to start our surveying earlier so that it can inform the budgeting process. Things like if a property needs more bike racks, there was a property where the parking situation was creating a lot of struggles for people. And so property management took a harder look at that. Resident Services uses the results to inform their programming. We've learned, we're learning why people can't attend some programs. And so that will inform how they're being delivered and when they're being delivered. So the results have been really informative for all aspects of the work that we do.
Great, thank you. A question that popped up for Carmen, I think based on Carmen, what you were just talking about with getting stakeholder feedback. If you wanna, Malia's asking if you could elaborate on how you get resident guidance or feedback on outcomes, maybe like the ways in which you
Sure.
elicit that feedback.
Yeah. So as we walked through the CORS certification, going through that, we developed some survey tools that looked into demographics, education and health insurance, all sorts of things with our residents. If we see in a survey like that the majority of the residents at a property say don't have a high school diploma, then that triggers us. Is this a need for that community? Well, we don't want to just assume that people want to get their high school diploma or high school equivalency. So that's when we would go with an idea in mind and then ask the residents, how many of you were interested in this? If we were able to bring a GED or high school equivalency class on site, how many would participate? Again, is this something that you all are even interested in? So if we have interest, then we know this is something that we want to pursue. So a lot of time that's what it is. It's we see a need or we see a deficit, we see a gap somewhere, and then we try to, again, backtrack and say, how do we fill this need or gap or deficit? But in the first place, is it even a desire for the residents? So that's one of the ways that we would use that feedback to guide, programming and services.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see we have a couple minutes left. Do you think we have time for one more question, Alexandra, or do you think we should wrap it up? Maybe one more quick question. Well, I have one more question planned for Christy or Carmen. Just thinking about our audience here, and we probably have quite a few investors, funders that have joined us. Are there types of funding that you think are really helpful for supporting data evaluation, impact measurement work, or ways similarly that funders can help you support this work and advance this practice?
I'll say that surveying is expensive. Between survey incentives, we've learned that events are a good way to drive up the participation in the surveys, even printing up hundreds and hundreds of surveys. So as always, money is always nice. But knowing that the information is useful and that people will be able to use it in some way to help drive outcomes more broadly, that's good to know too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Carmen.
Can I add the importance of funders also understanding that our work is something that we're passionate about. And there is a movement towards trust-based philanthropy. So funders out there, make sure that you're balancing that data burden. What is it, the reporting burden? Is it going to be too much for a nonprofit who may not have all of those positions because they can't afford it? Is it going to be a burden to them to produce what it is that you're looking for? So just keep that balance in mind in terms of reporting burden and ability of nonprofits, especially to produce that sort of in-depth information.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we speak to that in the toolkit for the need for systems and infrastructure and investment to do the work well. Yeah. So I'll pause there. I think we're at time. And any final words, Alexandra? Or
no, I just want to say thank you to all three of you, and another thank you to Amazon for supporting this work. There's a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. You know, this is a hot topic. It's a continually evolving space. So we also want to, hear from all of you. If there are resources and systems and example assessments or survey tools that you've found useful or that you've created that you'd be willing to share, we'd love to feature them in the CORE's resource library so that we can help organizations who are on this journey of continuing to improve their practice and learn from their peers. So here are all the ways you can get in touch with us. And just another thank you to all of you, and have a great afternoon.
Yep, thank you as well. Appreciate it. Thanks all for joining. Take care.